what a dream looks like. Is it to feel pain, or is it to feel love?
Everybody is deluged with information. What to pay attention to, what to ignore.
Intelligence is clearly the ability to predict, to know what's going to happen next.
L'inspirateur n'était pas un être humain, mais c'était une calculatrice.
The most valuable thing you can develop is intuition.
I think schools should be focused on respect and ethics.
Use it or lose it.
Las limitaciones a veces son muy buenas.
Any intelligence can be used benignly or malignantly.
I do not see any relationship between intelligence and morals.
We are the emotions of our passion. Are we going to be able to be educated well enough to understand that nature is about life?
El odio todavía sobrevuela este país como un pájaro negro. Ya no se siente tanto en las miradas, pero permanece en las costumbres pequeñas, en los gestos automáticos. Odio en las alacenas, en los roperos, cansancio de tanto odio que pasó. Aristóteles decía que el odio era incurable, pero con el tiempo comenzó a vérselo como una actitud que era pasible de cambiar. Dicen los científicos que el odio se puede escanear. El odio está en la circunvolución frontal del hemisferio derecho del cerebro. Otros sostienen que el odio vive en el corazón o ensucia el alma. El odio es hijo del miedo. Odiamos lo que no entendemos y desestabiliza nuestro pequeño sistema de creencias. Por eso las brujas odiaban a los médicos y los guerreros a los pacifistas. Nuestro occidente académico y atildado hasta hace pocas décadas no dejaba votar a los negros o a las mujeres. La España descubridora veía a los indios como animales. Y Europa le dio sustento filosófico a la teoría de supremacía del hombre blanco. El odio forma parte de la cultura. ¿Con quién casaría a su hija? ¿Con un obrero inglés o con un obrero boliviano? Mary Barton es argentina y llegó a los 21 años a Sudáfrica. Hace años que sueña en inglés y el español que aprendió en el Northern de Olivos forma parte de un lejano pasado. Mary fue elegida por Mandela para integrar la Comisión de Verdad y Reconciliación y comenzó su militancia junto a las Black Sash, una organización de mujeres blancas que llevaban una faja negra en luto por la pérdida de derechos. En 1995, Mary Barton escuchó en la CONADEP sudafricana a 22.000 víctimas y unos 7.700 represores. ¿Cuál es la primera imagen que tiene de Sudáfrica? ¿Cómo llegó? ¿No llegó en avión?
No, in those days you couldn't go by plane, you had to go by sea. I went from Santos to Cape Town, and it is a very, very beautiful city. It's often compared with Rio de Janeiro and other very beautiful port cities. but it is also a very cruel city, very divided, perhaps one of the most racially divided of South Africa's cities. And it's very obvious that that is so, because even though now the city is integrated, the years of apartheid have meant that people still live in different areas, and the poor people still live on the periphery of the city.
¿Cuál es su primera imagen de la apartheid?
Well, I was a young, newly married woman, and my first friends were my husband's friends, and one of them invited me to go and help her in a project that she was working with, which was taking food to poor people. And it seemed as if from under every tree came a child with an empty tin for us to put soup into. But I asked myself, yes, where there are poor people, there's a need for charity. But what can one do to change the situation, not just give out soup?
Apartheid significa separación. Fue impuesto en Sudáfrica por los colonizadores ingleses y holandeses y comenzó en 1948 con la llegada al poder del Partido Nacional. Primero fue la ley que prohibía los matrimonios mixtos, después la que declaraba la fornicación ilegal. Había 4 grupos: blancos, negros, indios y mulatos. Se dividieron las playas, los autobuses, los hospitales, las escuelas y los bancos en las plazas.
The degradation of the tests to decide what color you were in those, that was also something very new when I arrived there. There was a story about the pencil test, that they used to put a pencil in your hair, and if your hair was very curly, like African hair is, the pencil would stay there. Then you were an African. But if the pencil fell out because your hair was not so curly, then you were not. And it was a time also when Cape Town was being divided into racially separated areas. Until then, people had been free to live in different parts of the city. But in the 1950s, the legislation had been passed to divide the city into racially segregated suburbs. And people were being picked up and moved far out of the center of the city. The big trucks would come and take up all their possessions and all the people and all their furniture and transport them out of the city. And there was terrible heartbreak. People committed suicide, people were broken-hearted and remain broken-hearted to this day for all that they lost in that.
La del Distrito 6 de Ciudad del Cabo es la historia de un exilio. 60.000 personas fueron expulsadas de aquí cuando se decidió convertirlo en un barrio exclusivo para blancos. Hubo quienes salieron a la mañana y a su regreso se encontraron con escombros.
we were labeled as colored. Your black folk were called natives or Bantu, and then just blacks. And then, of course, there was your whites, and then your Indians. Your Chinese were regarded as colored, and this was the apartheid system. All people of color were taken out of these areas and then deposited in the sandy waste of the Cape Flats. And there they were placed into what is known as your townships. Your townships, which I always consider to be based on the Nazi ideology of ghettos. As it did with Jews, Gypsies, and Poles, they were placed into ghettos. Only difference between our ghettos and their ghettos really is there were no barbed wire fences and gun towers, but psychologically you were brainwashed to believe this is where you must stay. And this is how they engineered the thinking of the people and placed them there.
En la discusión cotidiana con cualquier persona blanca, de su familia, o no en la discusión política, sino en la cotidiana, ¿cómo explicaban ellos que veían a los negros? ¿Qué eran para ellos los negros? O sea, ¿cómo argumentaban que los negros tenían que tener trato distinto?
Well, that was one of the things that I had to try and learn to understand, of course, that it seemed so hard to understand that. But after all, apartheid, even though it only really became law in the 1950s, it had been common practice under colonial rule. And black people had been discriminated against since the very arrival of people from Europe in Africa. The African National Congress, for example, was formed in 1912, 100 years ago, to begin to resist the rules that the white colonizers were imposing on them, the taking away of their land, the dividing up the country into reserves, which would be the only places where black people would have rights.
This block over here, this is the block that I lived in. That's my home over there. And I stayed there for 27 years. And this quad here, this is where we played our soccer, our cricket. 2 of those blocks were demolished. And why? Because they needed to build garages for the cars of the white people. Now, I know of cases where people had gone to work the morning and then come back the evening and find that the house has been demolished. So I can imagine one day you're here, come home, and they're busy demolishing your home. And suddenly you find that slowly but surely, all around your homes are disappearing.
La discriminación racial comenzó en Soweto mucho antes de que fuera promovida por ley. Ya en 1900 vivían allí los trabajadores negros de las minas de oro que explotaban los blancos. Soweto dijo basta en 1976 y produjo uno de los episodios emblemáticos de la lucha contra el apartheid. Aún hoy, la tasa de desocupación ronda el 40%. Alf Kumalo es uno de los fotógrafos más importantes del mundo. Colabora en el New York Times, Time Magazine, The Independent y Der Spiegel. Fotografió a Mandela durante 35 años, pero recién en 1990, cuando Sudáfrica tuvo las primeras elecciones democráticas, pudo dar a conocer su trabajo en su país.
This is the prelude to the events of 1976. And this guy is being arrested. Both of these guys are policemen. And this is in the 60s, but this is during a soccer game. And this is 76 as well. They're beating this man up. Fortunately, he's still alive. And then, of course, this is part of the uprising here. As you can see, this is Meadowlands Hostel, police firing tear gas.
¿Cuál fue el primer muerto que vio víctima de racismo?
In really the times when one began to see violent death was in the 1980s, when protest resistance was very strong, and there would be protest marches, rallies, demonstrations, and we as a group of white women were asked often to be present. One of the things that we did was to witness events so that we could talk about them with first-hand knowledge and tell the world what was happening. But also because people told us that when there were white women present, there was less risk of very brutal, violent behavior by the authorities and also by the demonstrators. So it was a real duty to be present. And sometimes it seemed as if every weekend there would be a demonstration one weekend, and the next weekend there would be a funeral of those who had been killed in that demonstration, which would then in turn once again become a demonstration.
That became the turning point in South Africa's politics. In a short space of time, the army and the police mowed down 69 people. This is 1980 in Soweto. This guy he just couldn't take it because they were unleashing dogs on them, but he was brave enough to face the police. There were some very, very brave people amongst people. There are those who refuse to run, who just face the police, yeah. And yet he's not that big, but he faced them nevertheless. This is one of the worst days of the uprising of 1976. It was actually totally illegal to shoot this picture. Police had instructions to shoot to kill, and we were instructed not to be there. No photographers were wanted. But I shot these pictures through the back window of the car. But after shooting the pictures, I turned slowly and dropped the camera on the floor of the car, changed the film, put it on my shoe, and then put a different film just in case they see me and harassed me. But we've got to make sure it was actually, Jewish people were dying. It was one of the worst days, yeah.
El 16 de junio de 1976, un viento cálido recorrió Soweto. El viento se transformó en fuego y finalmente en hielo. Aquel día, los estudiantes ganaron la calle en protesta por la imposición del Afrikaans como lengua obligatoria.
I was 16 years old, and my brother was 12 years old. Our education was referred to as Bantu education. That means it was different from what was being taught in the white areas. So it's like, this is for black people. We really felt threatened because we knew that Afrikaans is an oppressor's language. So why did we have to learn in that language? If it's education, we have to stand up for ourselves.
Todo comenzó con 30 chicos cantando el himno Soto frente a la escuela secundaria Pefeni. En segundos, toda la ciudad cantaba el himno bajo los gases y las balas. Hubo 500 muertos.
We never thought police would open fire, no, because we just thought they're there to monitor the situation, you know. But to shoot, it did not really make sense. You know, we were running helter and skelter, running amok in confusion, hiding ourselves in the nearby houses. You know, it was so confusing.
Antes de ser una foto que recorriera el mundo, Héctor Peterson era un chico de 12 años que protestaba en su colegio. Después fue un cuerpo casi moribundo en brazos de otro estudiante que corría desesperado buscando ayuda. A su lado, en la foto, su hermana Antoinette llora desgarrada.
I was very scared, you know. I just went blank, you know, I couldn't think. The first thing that I spotted, it was my brother's shoes. I saw blood coming from the side of the mouth, you know, I panicked. And all of a sudden, a car just stopped in front of us, and one lady jumped out of the car, and she said she's a journalist, she can help us. So as the gentleman was about to put my brother in the car, he said, oh, he's dead. But, you know, I was just numb, but I couldn't do anything. I couldn't believe that was happening.
When Hector Peterson was shot, I had taken some shots. I had shot those pictures, the whole sequence. Yeah. I had shot even girls on the fence, hanging on the fence like washing. They tried to jump, but they were young, and the wires the fence just trapped them. Yeah, those pictures I never can get out of my mind.
Antoinette se encarga ahora de las visitas guiadas del Museo y Memorial Héctor Peterson, a pocos metros de donde su hermano fue asesinado. Usted llegó a estar presa en distintos momentos, ¿no?
The only time that I really spent in prison was in 1985, when Nelson Mandela was being held in a prison in Cape Town, and there was a huge march was planned to go and deliver a message of support handed over at the prison gates. And the march was banned, and it was very violently broken up by the police. So much so that only a few of us who lived in the protected white areas managed to get anywhere near the prison. And as we did, we were arrested, and then we were held in prison for a few days. And even in prison, the worst thing was knowing that as a white woman you were getting better treatment in prison than other people in the other aspects of the prison.
Yo leía que, por ejemplo, en las cárceles se les daba pantalones largos a los blancos y cortos a los negros porque los trataban como niños.
In the prison, for example, on Robben Island, there were no white prisoners at that time. The prisoners were also segregated according to race. But in Robben Island, by the time that I knew anything about it, there were so-called colored prisoners and black African prisoners, and that's where the differentiation came. So that colored people were given different food to eat, warmer clothes to wear, thicker blankets to sleep on, and black people were presumed to be stronger and hardier and have less need of those things. And that was one of the very interesting things that under Mandela and Walter Sisulu and others in the prison, they were determined to break down those divisions and to share what they had irrespective of their racial divisions, and to begin to work even with the prison warders who were white and often very badly educated, to treat them as human beings, to refuse to let you might say, a natural hatred take over.
El nazismo llegó al gobierno de Alemania en 1933, cuando el presidente conservador Paul von Hindenburg designó a Hitler como primer ministro. Así comenzó la llamada República de Weimar, que culminó en una dictadura. Los nacionalsocialistas sostenían la supremacía de la raza blanca y dentro de ella de los arios, a los que consideraban su expresión más pura en el siglo XX. Los nazis también tuvieron cierta adhesión en países como Estados Unidos, donde el racismo se dirigió a la minoría afroamericana. Henry Ford fue seguidor y ardiente difusor de la ideología nazi entre el público de habla inglesa. Los nazis propiciaron y llevaron adelante el exterminio sistemático de unos 12 millones de personas. Más de la mitad de ellos judíos, pero también cerca de 1 millón de gitanos, comunistas, socialistas, homosexuales, negros, disidentes religiosos, clérigos católicos o protestantes y masones.
I come from ashes and destruction. I can close the eyes and can still smell the burned books or the burned synagogues. Our village was surrounded by a brook which was red from the blood of the killed people. Okay?
Fania Gottesfeld pudo haberse llamado Anna Frank. Hoy vive en Nueva York y maneja una fundación dedicada a recordar el horror del Holocausto. Contó su historia en un libro, El amor en un mundo de dolor, publicado en 2005.
I don't even have enough words to explain what hunger is, how it feels to be hungry, how it feels to wait to be killed. I used to ask my father, how long does it take to die from a bullet, okay? Or hunger. We were 2 years in a hole. I'm alive here because a righteous Christian, the poorest in the village, who knew, he said his religion, he's Christian, tells him that he has to love his neighbor, took us in, my mother, my father, and my little brother. If they would have caught him, saving a Jew was punishable by death. Not to scare the population, they used to catch a non-Jew, hang him on the marketplace with a big sign saying, I helped a Jew. He was the poorest in the village. He had only one little child. Now I'm asking you, I ask every audience, would you risk the life of your only child to saving 4 Jews who were condemned to death already? I don't know. He was so poor, he shared the last piece of bread with us. He didn't even have a cow or a horse. But he said, he couldn't even sign his name. He used to do 4 crosses. So first we were on his attic, then we were in his barn, and then all the neighbors who were Nazi collaborators started to talk. There's something's going on there. He dug a cave for us underneath. For 1.5 years. We were totally dependent upon him to bring us a little water, a little piece of bread. We were surrounded by rats and mice and lice. I said in my book that I had so many lice that my hair was moving. It's not a figure of speech, literally. Waiting any minute to be killed.
Hablando del holocausto, Woody Allen dijo una vez que lo que le extrañaba no era Hitler, sino que no hubiera vuelto a suceder. ¿Qué pasa cuando las sociedades se vuelven locas y deciden matarse entre sí?
Well, I think that the major lesson of the Holocaust, frightening lesson, is that it happened, right? That's true. And once it happened, then, as another great German philosopher, Günther Anders, said, happening of something awful does not decrease the possibility of repetition. On the contrary, it makes it more probable. Hiroshima was a shock, tremendous shock, you know, 100,000 people killed, murdered in one go. But Nagasaki hardly ever remember, you know, it was repetition. Hiroshima made Nagasaki likely, not only possible, but likely. My fears are even go further than that, because I think that the most awful lesson of the Holocaust is that ordinary people, good fathers, good neighbors, excellent parents, very nice people, people with whom you would like to spend your time, go to pub, drink beer together, they participated in this mass murder. The easiness, the facility with which ordinary people can participate in doing evil.
I tell, when I go to schools and they ask me, where was God, right? And I said, where was man? I said, you know, I studied philosophy all my life. When I find the answer, there is no answer. That's the problem. The question is, how come that ordinary people like you and I, who had families, went to church, listened to Beethoven, could become killers? What is it in the human psyche that 1 minute you can become evil? Hitler, when Hitler was imprisoned in Landsberg, because he wanted to overthrow the government, he wrote his famous book, My Struggle, Mein Kampf. In it, he put black and white what he's going to do. He's going to create a beautiful, perfect race, blonde hair, blue eyes. Everybody will be a slave, cater to them, but the Jews will be killed, black and white. My father was a humanist, polyglot, multiple languages. He read the book, he said, come on, it's not written well. Nobody will believe it. People, he said, had a Beethoven, a Goethe, and a Schiller, and they will not kill us. They were. They were so brainwashed. That's what happens. The Wannsee Conference in 1942, when they declared the final solution, when Heydrich, who was there? You think, who was there? People from the street? Lawyers and doctors. They declared the final. Eichmann had 2 doctorates, a PhD and an MD, okay? One and a half million children. Go ask a question. What crime have they committed? There's not even a name for them. This famous poet, Anna Akhmatova, the Russian, she wrote a beautiful poem. She said, I would call you all by name, but the names, the records are gone, there are no names. You know, it's like, the question, what happened?
¿En algún momento, a lo largo de todos estos años y en los momentos más difíciles, pensó que esto no iba a cambiar nunca? ¿Que iba a ser siempre así?
I never thought I would live to see the end of apartheid, and hundreds of us did not think so either. In the 1970s, it seemed impossible that anything would ever change. The black leadership was either in exile or underground or silenced by long periods of prison, and generally there seemed to be a sense of real fear that any time you lifted your voice in protest, you would have terrible reaction. And it was quite clear that change was not going to come about through white people opposing the system, and many white people did, or through parliament, through a white parliament that was never going to grant rights to black people. So, whereas on the one hand one opposed the violence, in fact, partly the violence is what led to the change that happened. The violence and the international opposition, plus, of course, the change in the world, the change in the role of communism altogether, and the change that was happening in Africa, in Angola, and in Mozambique. All those things came together. But even in the 1980s, when it was very clear that the state machinery could not continue to maintain its strength any longer, there was always the possibility that it would end up in a terrible, terrible civil war and that everything would be destroyed.
The most frightening, most terrible conclusion from studying the Holocaust is that how easy it is for people to do it. It was a normal society, normally working. The normal railway men brought people to the gas chambers. You know, the sanitary officers poured the poison through the chimney. Ordinary people in their ordinary capacities, not special capacities. They were not appointed murderers. They were doing their jobs, and they did it. It was, of course, extraordinary situation. It was a situation of war going on. During the war, things may happen which do not happen in the peacetime. That's all true. But we are moving towards extraordinary times. We are living, actually, already in extraordinary times. So this cooperation between circumstances may happen again.
Racism will stay there forever. It will take decades. It will take, I don't know how many years. It has been there, even in other countries, it's still there. It's only that it's subtle. So people are used to racism, so even if it's there, I don't think people will feel it like they used to feel it in apartheid era.
So it shows that people can coexist if they respect each other as another person, not another creed, not another culture, not looking at each other differently, because we all come from one source. Until we bleed in different colors, we come from one race, and that's the human race. So color of skin, texture of hair, bridge of nose has absolutely nothing to do with the price of eggs. A lot of people ask me, am I coming back to District 6? Well, quite frankly, no. Reasons being, I have nothing to come back to in District 6. All that I have of District 6 probably is the mountain behind me and the sea in front of me. And the children are growing up in those areas. They owe very little allegiance to District 6. And you find that many of the people that are coming back are either the very own, want to die with table behind them, and sea in front of them, and their memories of District 6.
Santayana said, our philosopher, if you don't remember the past, it may repeat it in the future. Just to quote him, not literally. We have to talk about the past because we are part of the past. And we have to fight ourselves not to do what we did in the future. We have to teach our children not to be perpetrators. We have not to be bystanders and not to be victims. We have to teach our children not to hate. Hate brings intolerance brings hate, and hate brings more hate. There's not enough love. There's too much hate now going all over. All over. Our mantra is never again, but nobody listens to us. So this is why, as long as we are still alive, I'm one of the last survivors. We are all in the 70s and the 80s. It behooves upon us. It's important that we go out and we teach the young people what's going to happen that when evil takes over our psyche, because we have both good and bad. Can it happen again? Everything can happen.
We live in times where the only certainty we have is the certainty of uncertainty.
There's no guarantee for anything. It's scary.
Well, we stop fighting for these sort of things and start fighting for a piece of bread and a glass of water. What may happen then, it's very difficult to predict. Our abilities, are frightening, really.
¿Dónde estaba el odio? ¿En los dos? ¿En los blancos? ¿En los negros?
I think there were examples of hate and hostility and fear on all sides. Because when you create a system like that, even though it might have existed in practice before, but when you enforce it, there's always a threat of violence. Because if you break the law, the powers of the state will come down upon you. And so there has to be an undercurrent of violence when people are denied their rights. So the violence came from both sides, came from anger and fear and resentment on all sides.
¿Usted llegó a odiar? ¿Usted?
I don't think so. I think one of the amazing things about living in South Africa is that you get inside the skin of other people. You see what makes them fear, what makes them angry. You see them as human beings. I think it's really only possible to hate if you can put enough of a barrier between yourself and the other person as a human being. But if you have the capacity, or your own history leads you into such a way that you can understand why people do what they do, then it's very difficult to hate. And for me, in a way, that's one of the things that I hoped would come from the Truth Commission, that we would so enable all South Africans to see each other as people who had been stuck in a historical situation and motivated by the forces around them, that would help them to understand each other. Maybe not to forgive, but to understand. But I believe that if you could put together a young white man who had gone into the army believing it was the right thing to do because his school and his parents all thought it was the right thing, and you had him come face to face with a young black man who had gone into exile and come back as a guerrilla, and help them to see that it was the forces that shaped them that made them take those decisions, not an inherent evil in themselves. That would be the building of the reconciliation that we need in South Africa.
¿Se puede odiar el odio o nunca podremos librarnos de él? ¿Qué hacer con el miedo? ¿Es posible o es justo perdonar? ¿El perdón es liberador? ¿El odio hace esclavos? ¿Cómo perdonar sin olvidar? Continuará.